Lisa Parker never intended to be the center of attention. At 47, she lived a simple, predictable life, waking up at 5, baking bread in the narrow kitchen of Parker's Diner, the restaurant her father had founded decades earlier, and serving customers with a firm but discreet smile. Located in a small conservative town where everyone knew everything and any news became news on the newsstand, the restaurant was barely surviving amid the crisis that was ravaging local businesses. Her closest friends said that Lisa had an unusual sense of justice, inherited from her mother, a teacher who stood up to the school board to defend excluded students. But until then, this trait had never been put to the test so directly until Friday morning, when everything changed. It was around 7:30 a.m. when Ray Mercer walked through the front door of Parker's Diner. He was wearing a worn leather jacket with a Hells Angels emblem on the back, thick boots, and a graying beard that betrayed his early 50s. The regulars froze for a moment. A group of police officers were already there drinking coffee, and it didn't take long for the tension to build. Without saying a word, one of the officers stood up and approached Ray arrogantly, insinuating that he wasn't welcome there. Lisa watched the scene from behind the counter, and something inside her revolted. It wasn't about Ray's emblem or his appearance. It was about the way he'd been treated, like a criminal without even saying a word. When she heard that he just wanted a coffee before visiting his daughter in the hospital, she made a decision that she knew would have consequences. She spoke up for him, her voice firm and her eyes unambiguous. The silence in the restaurant was immediate, broken only by the sound of a spoon hitting the saucer on one of the tables. Lisa placed herself between the officer and Ray, saying that everyone was welcome there, as long as they respected the space and the other customers. The officer tried to argue, but she didn't back down. She said that Ray wasn't doing anything wrong, and that if he wanted to stay, he could have his coffee in peace. The man didn't react with hostility. He just nodded, visibly tired, and sat down on one of the benches near the window. The officers, disconcerted, left the place minutes later without even paying the bill. It was only when the door closed that Lisa realized what she had done and how far it could go in a city where what is said in the morning shapes behavior at night. The atmosphere was tense for the rest of the day. Some customers got up and left, others just watched. No one said a word about what had happened, but the looks on their faces spoke volumes. Lisa tried to stay focused on her work, cleaning tables, serving food, refilling coffee. But deep down, she knew a line had been crossed, and it wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. Later, as closing time approached, a woman who had been a regular at the restaurant for years came up to the cashier and said coldly, "You'll see what you did." Lisa didn't respond. She locked the door of the diner at the end of the night with a nagging feeling in her chest, not of regret, but of anticipation. She knew something was about to change. She just didn't know how much. On Saturday morning, the change was already obvious. Unlike normal days, there was almost no movement. Only 2 customers came in before 9, and both stayed for a few minutes, leaving without consuming anything. Lisa tried to keep up the pace, sweeping the floor and organizing the cutlery, but she couldn't ignore the emptiness that was taking over the room. Her cell phone started beeping with anonymous messages. "Traitor. Supports criminals. You will pay for this." On the bulletin board at the entrance, someone had stuck a sheet of paper with big letters. "This place does not represent us." She tore off the paper, folded it slowly, and threw it in the trash. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at the empty counter that had sustained her life and her father's legacy for so long. She thought about calling him, but her father was too weak to understand what was happening. He had been hospitalized for weeks, and he no longer remembered the days clearly or recognized all the faces. It was because of him that Lisa kept the diner afloat, even when the profits barely covered the costs. She sat in the corner of the kitchen with a cold coffee in her hands and wondered if she had done the right thing. Not because of fear, she had known that since she was a child, but because she was alone in making a decision that clearly went against the will of an entire city. The sound of engines in the distance pulled her from her thoughts. First one, then three, then dozens. She got up and went to the front window. What she saw made her heart stop for a second. Main Street, which used to be silent on Saturdays, now vibrated with the heavy roar of more than 200 motorcycles. Men and women in leather jackets, custom helmets, tattoos on display, all parked side by side in front of Parker's diner. It was impossible to ignore the scene. The few neighbors who still peeked through the windows closed their curtains. Lisa stood at the door, unsure whether to unlock it or not. But before she could decide, Ray Mercer got off one of the motorcycles and walked over to her. He was carrying a small cardboard box in his arms and looked grateful. He said simply that he was there to say thank you. Not for himself, but for his daughter, who had died that morning and had had her last moment of lucidity when she learned that her father would be received with respect at that restaurant. When Lisa unlocked the door, the first group entered quietly. They sat down carefully without fuss, as if respecting the space and the significance of this moment. Ray placed the box on the counter. It was full of photos of his daughter, children's drawings, and a letter she had written before she died, thanking her father for never giving up on her. The mood inside changed. There was no music, no loud conversations, just a collective feeling of respect that filled every corner of the diner. Lisa made coffee as she always did, but now each cup carried a different weight. The bikers took turns at the tables, leaving generous tips, buying whatever they could, as if they wanted to give back in force what the city had tried to take from them the day before. As Lisa waited on customers one by one, she noticed something she had never seen before. Strangers chatting with each other like old friends. A construction worker who had always avoided bikers was laughing with a woman with purple hair and a nose ring. Two veterans from different generations were arguing about which coffee was better, the house coffee or the instant coffee from the hospital. A boy from school came in with his uniform still dirty from training and filmed the scene to post on social media, saying it was history in the making. Lisa didn't try to understand. She just watched. Because for the first time in years, Parker's Diner felt like more than a restaurant. It felt like a gathering place for people who were tired of labels and ready to listen. The noise of conversations began to attract attention from outside. Curious onlookers, former customers, and even people who had criticized Lisa the day before began to appear on the sidewalk. Some pretended to just watch, others risked a timid step inside. And when they realized they were being greeted with a smile and a hot coffee, they sat down. No speeches were made, no one apologized, but there was a mixture of embarrassment and admiration in the looks on their faces. Ray remained there until early afternoon, when he said he had to go back to take care of the funeral arrangements for his daughter. Before he left, he looked at Lisa and said softly, "Today you were family to me." She nodded with a tired smile, and when he left, the applause was spontaneous, not for him, but for what that gesture symbolized. That evening, when Lisa finally turned off the coffee maker and turned off the kitchen lights, her body ached as it had only a few days before. But it wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was the emotional toll of everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. At the back of the room, on a table, was a small stack of notes left by customers. Thank yous, personal stories, even an apology for turning her back the day before. Lisa picked each one up carefully, as if they were fragile pieces of a puzzle that were suddenly beginning to fit together. This city hadn't changed overnight, but for the first time, it seemed open to trying. Before leaving, Lisa stopped by the hospital to visit her father. He was awake, though confused. When she told him about her day, summarizing what she could without expecting much of a reaction, he smiled slightly and squeezed her hand with the strength he had left. "You did the right thing, daughter," he said with difficulty. That was enough. Even though there were still those who criticized her, even though the city carried old habits that were hard to break, Lisa knew that she had acted with her heart and that she was no longer alone. As she left the hospital, she took a deep breath in the empty parking lot and looked up at the dark sky. There was no party, no newspaper headlines, but there was peace. A peace built on courage, respect, and a simple choice to treat others as human beings before any judgment. On Sunday, Parker's diner looked different. The signs of the day before were still there. Dirty footprints on the floor, chairs out of place, cups hastily stacked, but the air felt lighter. Lisa arrived early, as usual, but this time she wasn't alone. A young man she'd never seen before, with a tattoo on his neck and a backwards cap, was waiting at the door with a bucket and mop. He said simply, "Yesterday was important. I want to help." Within an hour, others had shown up. An elderly couple, a grocery delivery man, even the police officer who'd made the first rude comment on Friday. No one came with a speech. They came willingly. And that, to Lisa, was worth more than any formal apology. As she set out to prepare the ingredients for lunch, Lisa realized that something inside her had changed too. For years, she had avoided confrontation, trying to keep the diner running on autopilot, as if following in her father's footsteps was simply a duty. But now she understood that honoring the past didn't mean repeating the same steps. It meant having the courage to make purposeful choices, even when they made her uncomfortable. What had happened there wasn't a miracle or a well-executed plan. It was the result of a solitary decision that for some reason resonated with people who were also tired of pretending everything was black and white. For the first time, she felt like the diner had come alive again. The following week, local newspapers began reporting on what had happened at Parker's diner. Some stories painted Lisa as a heroine. Others suggested that the whole thing had been staged. But those who were there knew. There was no acting, no exaggeration. There was only humanity. Lisa had never liked the spotlight and didn't care about the labels that came with it. What mattered to her was seeing the restaurant full, hearing laughter echoing around the tables again, and realizing that this place, once threatened to disappear, had become a silent symbol of resistance against prejudice disguised as tradition. Over time, the story became less talked about, like everything that one day seems too big and then blends into everyday life. But for Lisa, that would never be just an episode from the past. It was the day she saw a city look in the mirror, even if only for a few hours, and see that it was possible to do things differently. The diner was still struggling, the bills hadn't disappeared, and her father was still fighting for his life in the hospital. But now there was something new: support, presence, respect, and every time someone hesitantly walked through the door, she offered them a coffee and let the chair do the rest. Because after that Saturday, anyone could come in, as long as they were hungry for something bigger than food.